Imagine, just for a second, that you were the one going head-to-head with Boris Johnson at the dispatch box today. What would you ask about? Now, the obvious option is Partygate. All but one of Keir Starmer's 18 questions over the past 3 weeks have been on that subject. But today, the Labour leader changed tack to tax.
Surely even this Prime Minister doesn't need someone else to tell him that he and the Chancellor are having to raise taxes because the Tories failed to grow the economy over a decade. Today, he's ordering his troops to vote for tax cuts for banks.
Now, I've spoken to some of Keir Starmer's team. They say the reason they chose tax is because it's a real source of pain for Tory backbenchers. They do not like it, and therefore Conservatives sitting there in the chamber were less likely to heckle Keir Starmer. Now, we've analysed some of the words the Labour leader used today, words that appeared a lot. Tax and taxes, as well as working people, popped up. Boris Johnson's response, as ever, was to go on the attack Labour's economic record in government, even though, of course, that ended nearly 12 years ago.
Labour never forget, Mr. Speaker, there's never been a Labour government that left office with unemployment lower than when they were in office, Mr. Speaker. When they were finally booted out, they left a note saying there's no money left. That's the way they run the country, Mr. Speaker.
Tory MPs were pretty happy at all of that, shouting the word more as Boris Johnson sat down. We've analysed his language as well, the words that popped up in his responses to the main questions. You can see the recovery, the country, his record in government pop up a lot. Now, although Keir Starmer did not major on the issue of parties and Partygate, he still slipped in a few digs.
Word of warning, Prime Minister, that's not going to work with the police. The Prime Minister might want to sharpen how he answers questions under interview. He's going to need it. This Prime Minister has no respect for decency or honesty.
And the Labour leader even compared Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak to two ill-fated characters in a 90s crime film.
He and the Chancellor are the Tory Thelma and Louise, hand in hand as they drive the country off the cliff and into the abyss of low growth and high tax.
I think the right honourable gentleman is Dick Dastardly and Muttley.
The PM did seem amused by one opposition heckle as he discussed plans for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee.
The whole House will want to join me in thanking Her Majesty for her tireless service. We look forward to celebrating her historic reign with a series of national events in June. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues.
There were no critical Conservatives this week, but David Davis, who has called for the Prime Minister to quit, did decide to sit next to fellow Rebel grandee Andrew Mitchell. There was no sign of leadership favourites Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss, although the Foreign Secretary is, of course, in COVID isolation. Instead, Home Secretary Priti Patel seemed to be briefing the PM and heckling his critics.
PPE and record time, Mr. Speaker. People in work now than before the pandemic.
And do you remember this man, Jonathan Gullis, the enthusiastic Tory MP who last week went viral with his shouting and feet banging in the chamber? Well, today he was told off by the Speaker for his continued rowdiness.
Mr Gullis, I think you've been trilled for long enough and you don't want to be trilled anymore. And that is the last comment I have, or otherwise I will ring your mother.
Now, I watched all of today's PMQs from the press gallery looking down on the Commons chamber, and it was certainly far calmer than in previous weeks. A lot of that anger and fury had been replaced with, as you saw, humour and occasional moments of derision. One cabinet minister claimed that he thought it was a net win for the Prime Minister. I'm not sure there really was any clear winner, but certainly we saw certain economic arguments road tested today that I'm sure will reappear at the next general election, whether Boris Johnson is still Prime Minister or not.